Moscow, Idaho, is a college town. It is built around the University of Idaho, and so is everything around it. Every September, a new wave of 18 and 19-year-olds show up with boxes of stuff, moving into rented houses that have seen 100 classes come and go before them. By November 2022, the semester had settled into its usual rhythm. Midterms were done. Jackets were out. On King Road, a quiet residential street near campus, porch lights were starting to stay on a little later into the evening. These were the small, ordinary signs of a college town easing toward winter break. In the early hours of November 13th, 4 young lives ended in a house on that street, and within weeks, that quiet town would find itself at the center of a story the entire country was watching. In King Road were houses, one of which was a lively one. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan, both 21, had been best friends since childhood. They shared the kind of bond that had never needed anyone else, and one that others envied. They shared the house with several roommates, including 20-year-old Zana Kernodle. Zana's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, also 20, was around so often he was basically a roommate and part of the household. That Saturday night felt like any other end-of-semester night in a college town. Kaylee and Madison went out to a bar downtown, grabbed food from a truck afterward, and got a ride home in the early morning hours. Zana and Ethan spent part of the night at a fraternity party before heading back to the house themselves. 2 other roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funky, were also home, though their nights had gone differently. Much of what investigators later pieced together about that night comes from their memories and movements. What happened between roughly 4 and 4:30 that morning has since been pieced together from cell phone data, surveillance footage, and physical evidence, reconstructed, scrutinized, and argued over for years. Sometime after Kaylee and Madison got home, an intruder came in through a sliding door on the lower level and made his way up a narrow staircase. Investigators would later describe his movements as methodical and not chaotic. He knew where he was going. Zana Kernodle was still awake when the attack began. She'd ordered food and been chatting with her mobile phone after getting home. Investigators believe she ran into the intruder near the top of the stairs. Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Goncalves were killed in the rooms where they'd gone to sleep only a short time before. The medical evidence, later made public, described extensive injuries inflicted with a fixed-blade knife, and in at least one case, signs of a defensive struggle. Dylan Mortensen, one of the surviving roommates, later told investigators she woke up that night to what she thought was a cry. She opened her bedroom door. Down the hallway was a figure she couldn't fully identify, dressed in dark clothing, wearing a mask that left only his eyes visible, and bushy eyebrows, she would recall. She didn't call for help. She froze. Then she closed the door. It would be hours before anyone outside the house knew what had happened. The 2 surviving roommates didn't call 911 until shortly before noon, a delay that would later become one of the most painful, most publicly scrutinized details of the case. When police arrived at the house on King Road, What they found would stay with them for years. 4 young people were gone. 2 roommates, asleep on the floor below, had survived a night that changed everything for them, including fracturing their sense of safety permanently. In the days that followed, Moscow, that town of about 25,000 people, used to a low homicide rate, became the center of a national obsession. Reporters showed up on King Road. True crime commentators, armchair detectives, and amateur sleuths began combing through surveillance footage, social media, and anything they could find, hunting for a suspect the police weren't naming yet. And the police weren't moving fast. For weeks, they wouldn't name a person of interest. Even as pressure built from the families, the press, and a public that had already made these victims their own, it would take nearly 7 weeks for the case to break open. Investigators had recovered one piece of evidence at the scene that would prove central to everything that followed. A leather knife sheath found on the bed beside Madison Mogen. It was stamped with a Kabar logo and a Marine Corps insignia. On the snap, forensic analysts found a trace of touch DNA. It was not blood, neither was it an obvious contact stain. It was just the kind of incidental trace skin leaves behind when it brushes against something. It didn't match any of the 4 victims. It belonged, investigators believed, to whoever had carried that knife into the house. Alongside the physical evidence, there was a second trail. This one was built from cell phone data. Investigators traced a phone linked to a white Hyundai Elantra, a car that had shown up on nearby surveillance cameras circling the King Road neighborhood multiple times in the weeks before the murders. And again, in the hour the killings happened, that same phone, records showed, went dark for nearly 2 hours on the morning of November 13th. When it reconnected, the location data traced a route back toward Pullman, Washington, just across the state line. That's where investigators would eventually turn their full attention. It was in Pullman that a name surfaced. Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD student in criminology at Washington State University. He was studying the psychology of criminal offenders. He drove a white Hyundai Elantra. Investigators used a technique called genetic genealogy. This technique traces distant family connections through public DNA databases. It led them from the touch DNA on the knife sheath to a family in Pennsylvania, and from there to Kohberger himself. To confirm the match, investigators quietly obtained a discarded item from his family's trash outside their home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Kohberger had gone back there for winter break to spend it with his parents. The DNA from that item matched. According to the probable cause affidavit, later unsealed in court, investigators found a statistically overwhelming likelihood of a direct familial link/lash relationship to the sample from the knife sheath. On December 30th, 2022, nearly 7 weeks after the murders, law enforcement surrounded the Kohberger family home before dawn. Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. In his first recorded conversation with investigators, before any formal interrogation began, Kohberger made a small talk. He told one of the officers he looked familiar. As he walked out of the house, he asked about his parents and the family dog. When asked directly whether he wanted to talk about the murders, Kohberger said he'd need a lawyer. When asked again, he said the same thing. According to records later released, the conversation went no further that night.